Annet Nerima is a human rights defender. That's why I brought in that conversation. And he is a program manager at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Annet, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you so much.
Karibu
for having me
sana.
here.
Hapa, we are peace-loving people. Hard-working people.
Hardworking people.
Welcoming people. Proverb today, this week is from?
Zimbabwe.
And all of the big tribes in Zimbabwe?
Well, it's the Shona.
Zimbabwe.
Yes, and then by the way, border. You know, Zimbabwe also borders Mozambique. So it's not difficult to understand how these things happen. They also border Zambia. They also border South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Proverb. Do not be like the mosquito that bites the owner of the house.
Do not be like the mosquito that bites the owner of the house. Annet, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
Wow, that's an amazing one. So I would just basically situate it in the current political economic system that we live in. And so it's basically looking at the parasitic nature of individuals, and also perhaps I would look at it in terms of the leadership largely, where, for example, we as the citizens, we believe that sovereign power belongs to us. We have delegated it to the leaders, or would call them the members of parliament, for example, be it the county assembly members as well, to be able to lead us, and broadly just serve us. But at the end of the day, all we see is that they end up feeding from us.
They become mosquitoes.
Yes, who are the owner of the house. Yeah.
So if you're a member of parliament or an MCA in this country, the proverb against it is?
Do not be like the mosquito that bites the owner of the house.
Remember the owner of the house.
Yes.
Sawa. We are in the season of discussing and understanding what tax proposals are contained in the Finance Bill 2024, which shortly will be discussed through Parliament. The Parliamentary Committee on Finance and Planning is collecting views from all stakeholders on what they think about the tax proposals proposed by the National Treasury. And then Parliament will discuss that and maybe amend, maybe not, maybe pass, maybe not, but there will be new tax measures coming into the next financial year. As a civil society movement, I'm sure you've looked at the Finance Bill and you've picked out some areas that would be good for the country that may be having a negative impact on the civil society. Let's start with the good. Anything positive? There
are positives within the Finance Bill 2024. And I think even raising this is, first of all, appreciating that as a nation, we need to be able to generate taxes to enable the country or the government to be able to generate revenue and be able to serve the citizen, or be able to just broadly ensure that the governance system is actually functioning. So that's really important. And certainly this Finance Bill, much as it has punitive proposals, it also has the pros. But I think perhaps before I just respond to the question, we as civil society organization, first of all, knowing our broad role, where we basically advocate for the needs and concerns of the citizenry, and also basically appreciating that when you talk about tax, this is the clearest representation of a social contract. And so looking at this whole conversation, much as we bring in the technical element, I think we cannot discuss the Finance Bill 2024 and even 2023 last year. I think that's the other element that as civil society we missed, without bringing in the politics angle of it. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about policy conversation, when you look at the Finance Bill and, for example, a trend that has been set already, the politics took the day. And so as we are engaging in these processes within the legal frameworks as well, it's also important that we bring in the political angle. And that's why in our approach, we do the both adversarial and we also take the partnership bit of it. And for example, right now, looking at the framework or the timelines that we have, it's and today actually civil society organization, a team of us is actually meeting the finance and the planning committee where we are sharing our memorandum and some of the proposals that we have given. But again, it's also important that we bring in the political bit of it. And when I say tax is the clearest representation of social contract, we come from a point where we are saying on the 9th of August 2022, Kenyan went to the ballot. And the result of that was the Kenya Kwanza regime, which ideally Kenyans voted based on the promises that they were given. The bottom-up economic transformational agenda, which was basically advancing the hustler narrative. So that is the reason as to why we have this government in being. And so it's important that as these conversations are happening, the ordinary Kenyan is also trying to situate themselves. Where are we in this finance bill? As I'm raising taxes, as I'm paying my taxes, what am I gaining? Those are only political questions that have to be asked. At the same time, there's the issue of constitutionality. I mean, we talk about the rule of law. When you talk about the rule of law, and I know a conversation around public participation has really happened. But again, looking at Article 10 of the Constitution, which provides for the principles of governance. One of them, and when it talks about principle of governance, it says state officers and public officers are bound by this principle. One of them being human rights, the other one sustainable development, good governance, non-discrimination, name them, there are many, but I want to touch on public participation. We had public participation last year, and people keep on saying public participation happened, it happened and all that. Personally, I appreciate the fact that we are now at a point where we are talking about generating a public participation policy, which I strongly believe, if adopted, will be able to guide this whole conversation about public participation, because it's chaotic right now as is. We are having public participation, but not meaningful public participation. And a basic definition of public participation is engaging the public, but at the same time, giving full consideration of their input. With honesty, the public participation during the 2023 finance bill, 90% from the survey that was done by civil society organization, about 93% of the public views were not put into consideration. That just leaves us with about 7%. You know, it's really minimal. And so to any Kenyan, when you look at that survey, they were disgruntled by the outcome of the act at the end of the day. And we saw politics play the day, where we saw the president, for example, say he's on the lookout to see the MP who was allied to Kenya Kwanza, who was going to vote against the finance bill. We now see members of parliament from the Mount Kenya region say, yes, we passed the bill, but unfortunately we didn't read the bill, you know. And that's an injustice to even Kenyans.
How do we then gauge that public participation as an idea then is effective? I remember being taught on issues of communication, and we're taught that proper communication, I don't just say something to you, but then I look at the feedback and then I know that at some level communication has been complete. How do we gauge that with public participation? Does that mean that because I participated as a citizen, that if my views are not taken into consideration, do we say then that public participation was ineffective?
I think there are so many parameters to it for us to gauge and get to a level where we can now say this is meaningful public participation. Mm-hmm. A good example would be we have these conversations where we are all meeting the finance and planning committee of the National Assembly. If we were given a notice of about 3 days, that would be insufficient, for example, to allow me to prepare adequately and come and give substantive input into that conversation. Mm-hmm. Again, to an ordinary Kenyan, I'm a technical person, I can understand and review and analyze the finance bill, but not every Kenyan can do it, you know. Mm-hmm. So we are also expecting that if Parliament, for example, is investing in engaging in public participation, it would as well invest in communicating and conscientizing the public on what this bill is all about, and perhaps how is the bill is benefiting them or not, so that they can be able to as well gauge and make an informed decision as they engage, you know.
So there are many thresholds upon which public participation can be deemed effective or meaningful.
Absolutely.
So even if we're saying that across board, not 100%, but across board at some level, there's an understanding, for example, of what the finance bill actually means, in meaning, in definition alone, that what does it portend? That you have a finance bill, before your budget then is read, you know what it means. If we have a general understanding, or can we even say that public participation even means that people who've come to the table have a basic understanding of what this thing is before we even get into the different factors that make up the bill? Would we say then that public participation has taken place if across board folks understand that this finance bill we're talking about, what it actually means towards budget and for the country?
Absolutely. And I think even in responding to the same, for example, I like what the law really has gotten us into, where we are tabling the finance bill, but the budget process is as well happening. So we are clear on the taxes that we are raising and how they're going to be spent, for example. So you see, much as I get into this conversation, I can already tell, is the government going to put my money into good use, first of all? That alone is enough for an individual, when they look at the finance bill, to even deduce and say, this is not right, or this is right. You know, so I appreciate that kind of conversation. And I think for me, it's just basically to say that all the parameters as regards public, but including even feedback. For example, some of the critical proposals that, for example, civil society provided to the Finance and Appropriation Committee. A report was done after the retreat, and that report, again, in my view, I would say is technical, was not out there in the public domain, you know. So really, people do not have answers as to why some of their proposals, or most of them, were perhaps thrown out, or perhaps were not put into consideration. So there are many angles to public participation, and for me, I think when you talk about meaningful public participation, it really should be looked at holistically.
Sure.
There's something that you've said, that after last year's conversation around the finance bill, before it became, and then it went on and became the act, the Finance and Planning Committee received views from the public. People were engaging in various fora, and those views ended up with the Kuria Kimani Committee. And then you've said that thereafter the civil society conducted some survey which found that a majority of the views were not taken into consideration. Tell us a bit about that survey. How did you conduct it? What did you ask? What did you do?
So one of the civil society organizations, Tuaweza, East Africa, and CFA, Center for Fiscal Accountability. Yes, you're right. So those two organizations, and they're part of Okwa Uchumi, which most of the civil society that work around public debt and public finance management are part of. So these two organizations, because all of us bring in our strengths on this forum. So they did this study and were asking Kenyans randomly, what was their take? Do they think, or do they believe that their input into the finance bill was put into consideration? And hence the outcome that I've indicated, about 93% indicated that their views were not put into consideration.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they actually present their views? The people who were sampled, was the first question, did you present your views to the Finance Committee? And to find out how they actually presented their views to the Finance Committee. Okay,
so how this survey was done, it was looking at the different segments of the society. A snowballing one, but you see, in so doing, you also ensure that different stakeholders and also categories of Kenyans are put into consideration, be it the manufacturing sector, the profession, and all that. Okay. So basically looking at them based on their level of engagement as well. And you see, when you look at level of engagement, it even means the public protests, because it's a form of public participation, just demonstrating that I'm a disgruntled Kenyan and I am not happy with the punitive tax proposals that have been provided or given in this finance bill. So they participated in various ways, including going to the before the Finance and Planning Committee, but also using other avenues, including media, to just be able to share,
to express their views. Because I'm lost here between people who have expressed their views. They've engaged here in public fora, or calling onto Spice FM in the Situation Room, or speaking in various baraza, but they have not presented those views to that committee. And then in the end, you ask them, so do you feel happy that how you expressed yourself was actually considered by the committee? And of course, they'll say no. Now, in the end, when you say over 90% of people's views were not considered by the committee, what are we using? We are then using what came out, the committee report, versus the public sentiment. But do we have an interlink between the public sentiment and the committee and then the report? Because the report contained a summary, or in fact, it was saying we received views on this particular clause, we received views on the other clause, here we did this and the other, here we also considered. The report did that. So when we say that over 90% of public sentiment was not contained in this report, what exactly do we mean?
I look at it from a representation point of view. For example, you can talk to a Kenyan out there, but they are perhaps affiliated to a labor organization, or they work through, for example, social justice centers, which are based across the country. I mean, we see very many human rights defenders in these social justice centers, which are mostly in the informal segment, but they also cut across the nation. So their views are represented through their representatives. They share memorandums through their leadership. But that compounds or brings together their views. So when they say they were not put into consideration, it's not them literally coming as individuals, but at least they were through the organizations that they hold. If it's the profession, for example, it will be through their leadership, but people came in numbers. And I think for the first time ever, we all agree that the Finance Bill 2023 brought Kenyans together. And every Kenyan felt like they were going to be affected directly. And so they came out through the various ways that I have explained to just be able to express that they are unhappy and they want to contribute to this conversation, whichever way. Yes.
Okay. So I guess the reason I'm asking that is so that we can, as we continue the conversation about public participation and the meaningful public participation, is also looking at it from, are the views of the public actually reaching the people who ought to be hearing those views? Or should we have another way of ensuring that those people hear the public? And then we can quantify that the people heard the public, they listened to the public, they ignored the public, or they put the public views into consideration.
I think even hearing you, something interesting is coming to my mind, and it's basically played out in 2023. And we continue to see it even as a nation. Today, the new streets are social media. And we have seen policy decisions and actions happen through social media. So those are new streets. Much as we are having individuals going before the finance and planning committee of the National Assembly to present their views, we have seen the power of social media where people can protest there and duty bearers will listen. So I think even moving forward, and for me, when I talk about the multi-pronged approach, is basically Kenyans to express themselves with the available platforms, legal platforms, to just air, because the parliamentarians listen. And it's through those social media that they also communicate with their own people. So as they communicate to their own people, they also pick views at that particular point. So I think that's really, really an interesting angle to it. And I think it would be an important thing that the committee and the National Assembly in general also consider other platforms as well to just pick the views and the brains of Kenyans around this finance bill conversation. Our guest this morning on this finance bill conversation is Annet Nerima. She is a human rights defender and a program manager with the Kenya Human Rights Commission. So the civil society is presenting its memorandum before the Finance and Planning Committee of the National Assembly today. What are the highlights of what they're presenting? Great. From our analysis, we looked at three taxes: the income tax, for example, the excise duty, and also the value-added tax. And so we were looking at the human rights angle to them. And so, when you talk about taxation, there are principles that need to be adhered to. For example, neutrality. Just ensuring that everybody is accommodated in that tax proposal, looking at the issues of predictability and also simplicity as well. And I think that's something I have mentioned, which would tie largely to public participation. Is it simple for consumption to the ordinary Kenyan? The issue of equity and fairness, but also the efficiency aspect of it. So just situating within those parameters to see whether or not we are, as a nation, ensuring that the tax bill broadly is one that adheres to those principles of taxation. And I think I would just give the popular one, the motor vehicle
circulation tax.
Exactly. So when you talk about that one, I think the issue broadly and the concern for civil society organization is the equity aspect of it. So equity in the sense that, for example, we are giving a cap of about 100,000.
Yep.
And also the lower one being the 5,000.
Yep.
And so when you look at that analysis, for example, if somebody owns a car whose value is about 150, because they're supposed to pay the motor vehicle insurance at 5,000, which is the lowest, when you do that calculation, it means that they're going to pay about 1,250 more. So when you calculate, that is over the 2.5% that they're talking about as being the rate. Then we could give an example of when we have somebody owning a car whose value is about 20 million and the ceiling is about 100,000. So when you calculate again, this person owning a car whose value is about 20 million is going to pay 0.5%. So there's no equity there. What that demonstrates is that at the end of the day, that person who is owning a car of a lower value is going to pay more taxes beyond the 2.5% rate that has been provided in the finance bill. Yet we have somebody who, if you own a car worth 20 million, you're wealthy, and we expect, because we have always been advocating for wealth taxation, then it's just reasonable that you're also able to pay those taxes that really align with the value of the car that you're owning. So that's number one, and we see for sure that as a punitive one, and we can only push that it's again looked into by the finance and economic. So
what's the proposal? To remove the cap or to scrap the tax proposal altogether?
Again, altogether we would push that it's equally scrapped, because look at the efficiency bit of it, because again, this responsibility is being bestowed on the motor vehicle insurance companies as well to be able to just collect. So burden is given unto them to ensure that at the end of the day they're able to collect on behalf of government this 2.5. You get it? So it means even in terms of record keeping, it's more work unto them. But when you talk about the motor vehicle insurance proposal, we also look at it in terms of double taxation. Because again, through the VAT, we are paying the fuel aspect of it. We again are paying the insurance already, So again, to us, it would really be unfair that this proposal is actually introduced in this finance bill. So that's quite a concern for us. But again, largely, we are also looking at it in terms of those principles of taxation and just seeing that much as it's likely to sail through, but the issue of equity actually needs to be put into consideration while they're making the final decision. Then we are also looking at the per diems. For example, we have tax high tax exemption for higher earners. So previously with the per diems, they had been capped at these are daily subsistence allowance. They had been capped at a standard rate of 2,000 shillings for all. But now it's been introduced, and I would give an example. For example, if you earn 50,000 and it's calculated on your gross income. So if you earn 50,000 and your per diems are going to be calculated at 2,500 because it's been added a 500 on top of it. But somebody who earns a lot of money, for example, in terms of per diem, you earn like because it's being calculated based on your gross income. For example, you're earning like 200,000 and you calculate it from 10,000 shillings and above. So any monies that they earn on a per diem that is below 10,000 shillings, it's not taxed. So basically, this is a proposal that is favoring, especially those ones that are in the in higher earnings, as opposed to those ones that are earning lower amounts of money. Again, that as well points to the issue of equity, which is quite concerning for us. So we just advocating that at the end of the day, if these kind of taxes are being fronted through the finance bill, it's just fair that they ensure that the equity element again is put into consideration. In the interest of time, I wanted to pick quickly on these what we call the eco levy. And eco levy, it's a new tax. But reading around, we have other countries as well that have introduced eco levy, the Ghanas and as well. So I think being in an environment where we can say the appetite for taxation is really, really high, we see the introduction of all those manner of, or anything that can be taxable, honestly, it's really put into consideration. So we have the eco levy, which is a new tax, and this kind of tax is on some of the goods, manufactured goods that in the country, and also those ones that are being imported. And some of these goods are the smartphones, for example. We have the cameras, the rubber tire, the diapers as well, plastic packaging, but also the pencil sharpener. So when you look at all these items that the eco levy is being introduced to, are actually goods that we would say are of daily use to an ordinary Kenyan. You're talking of a pencil sharpener. I mean, any child who is in Kenyan's education system today has to use a sharpener. And so, for example, when we are introducing these kinds of levy, it's going to touch on socio-economical sectors, including education, honestly. So we are going to get to a point where if you are buying a sharpener at 15 shillings, for example, you're going to buy it maybe at 20 or 25. That is actually just increasing the cost of education broadly. Diapers, for example, today we do not have, even if it's in the informal settlement, we do not have a family that is not using diapers. I mean, there all kinds of diapers, whereas we appreciate and agree that we have climate change with us here, and perhaps this levy being introduced to ensure that at the end of the day, things like diapers, when it's gotten to a level where it's being disposed, there has to be a proper way that is really friendly to the environment in terms of disposing it. Our argument is, and this is me particularly saying this, I think we have seen, and last year we saw Kenya hosted the climate summit in this Africa climate in the country. You know, we have seen the president as well traverse the region as well, and has positioned himself as a climate change champion. And in my view, I think this tax is being introduced to be able to also just demonstrate that efforts and measures are being put in place to just ensure that matters climate change are being addressed in this country. But I think it's really misplaced. It's not timely at all, considering where Kenyans are, and it's also not well thought out, because we're also looking at affordability. So stuff like diapers, stuff like sharpeners, smartphones, for example. We are living in an era where when you talk about unemployment rate, it's about 6 point something right now, you know, and Kenyans, especially the youth, have found smartphones as one of those tools that they can use to be able to generate income for themselves. So again, for example, levying these kinds of taxes is really punitive in my view, but also
Can I
goes.
ask this question?
Yes.
Are there any taxes here that are not punitive?
Yes, they are.
Yes.
Yes. You
But
want me to
if they're
mention?
No. I don't want you to mention them.
They're rewarding.
They're rewarding, but you see, what I'm asking is, if you look at the overall picture that is painted by these taxes, what would you say they're trying to do? It is stated that the executive is trying to raise more money, collect more money. And are you saying that from what you see, some of these taxes will probably achieve the complete opposite? Now, I want to go beyond this discussion and ask the question, do we actually believe that the people who formulate these documents, which is the Treasury and probably the KRA, and they live in this country, that they actually do not know what some of these things that we are referring to as punitive would actually do, and that, in essence, they would actually induce and produce the complete opposite of what they're trying to achieve. We have a case in point during the COVID era in 2020, when Uhuru Kenyatta government did the complete opposite. And they brought in reductions in taxes. And the net result was that KRA actually met its target that year, 2020. And they also did so in 2021. They actually met the target, they said they met it. The reductions, it is argued, that brought this about. So, from 2020 to 2024, not much has changed. Not much really within KRA or even within the Treasury. So if it's the same people who are thinking and formulating this, how is it that they're getting it so wrong?
Good question. So for me, it's a yes and no answer, because they are the technical people, they are the experts, and they honestly do understand. But I think and believe that politics takes the day. The end goal is to generate taxes. And so a good example would be the housing levy, for example. One, when the executive was put to task to explain what this housing levy is all about, there was no clarity, you know. The end goal was ensure it's in the bill, ensure it's passed, then we will work backwards. And you have seen the struggle. You have seen organizations, including Kenya Human Rights Commission, go to court, especially on this housing levy issue. And you see at this particular point, we appreciate because, again, the court was able to pronounce itself and say sections of that of the finance bill, including that housing levy, was against the constitution. So for me, it's not that the formulators of the finance bill do not know what they are doing. They actually do know. In fact, for me, I would say they are deliberate to just ensure that at the end of the day, they are able to collect taxes. But again, let's look at, for example, this particular financial year. The government, the KRA has been unable to meet the collection target by around 300 billion.
Yes.
We need to be asking ourselves, even as we are formulating the finance bill of 2024, why did KRA, first of all, fail to meet its target? Could it be because of the punitive or the taxes that were introduced were not even those ones that they are able to collect? Just the same way we were looking at the housing levy, for example. You've introduced it, but the how, in terms of even collecting, becomes questionable. I am looking at all those scenarios as well, because what we end up seeing is that at the end of the day, get money, ensure that these people are taxed. But the how is what they keep on figuring out even as they go on.
I mean, this is a discussion which has many facets, but the facet I'm looking at now, are we laying the blame on the wrong people? Are we really making these decisions independently? Because, simple fact, the moment you get in bed with IMF or World Bank, who is their cousin, automatically they will be telling you what to do, essentially. And unfortunately, some of these policies that they introduce, one has to ask, where have they worked? So that we can say, well, you know, best practices we've done. Or are these fellows just experimenting with us, trying to figure out, well, let's see what these Africans can do, okay?
I like that. Good one. Because when I was talking about the politics, I think we were not able to have that conversation to the end. The other political question is the public debt. As of March this year, our public debt was standing at about 11.14%. It's way above the 10 trillion. But again, we have parliament that has overseen that. We have seen massive borrowing that we are unable to account on where this money is. So for us, debt accountability is quite an issue. And we see the hands of the IMF. And when you talk about experts, honestly, the IMF really cares less about pro-people. It's not pro-people, actually. It's about profit making. So whether you want to tax your citizens to death, that is not an issue for them. As long as you are able to commit that you are going to collect revenue and you are able to repay. And talking about debt again, I think when you look at even the budget estimates of this financial year, about 47% of revenues are going to go towards repayment of debt. Debt is an discretionary service or expenditure. So whether you like it or not, that becomes the first charge on our budget. We are seeing the recurrent budget as well, very much ballooned to the extent that 71% of our revenues are going to go towards recurrent. When it comes to development, where Kenyans now come in, that as you are overtaxing us, we want to see development, we want to see service delivery. Only 18% of monies that are being collected will go towards the development budget. What does that say? It says that we're even not adhering to our own legal frameworks regarding public finance. The Public Finance Management Act, Section 15, requires that at least 30% of the budget goes towards development and 70% towards recurrent. Clearly, even in the coming financial year, we're not going to be there.
So are we saying that it doesn't really matter? Because look at how we've come chronologically in this conversation. We're talking about, the political side of it. We've talked about public participation. But then we're saying we still end up in the same place, if not worse, at the end of every cycle. Mm-hmm. So essentially, then public participation doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, they're going to do what they want to do to get where they want to go.
Absolutely. It's a tick box process to just fulfill the law. And the art has been mastered. Why? Because people have gone to court previously, demonstrating that no sufficient public participation happened. And that's why you keep on seeing, as time goes by, it's tweaked. It's tweaked. And perhaps the other question has been, what is a quorum for public participation? But it's not only the numbers, it's even the kinds of conversations that are happening in that room. You can only speak and be termed as having meaningfully engaged if it's a conversation that really adds value to a process. But if not, if I am not at that level where I can be able to meaningfully engage or provide input, substantive and valuable input into a process, then why would I call that public participation?
But Nerima,
public participation.
Are you saying that the mosquito controls this house?
110%.
But how so? How does the owner of the house allow a pesky mosquito to control the house? Because what we are saying is, if the citizens are feeling all right, so even if we engage, even if we give our views, even if what they want, and I don't know who they here is, what they want will pass. We've got representatives of the people in Parliament right now discussing appropriation into the various departments and the various budget items. We've got representatives of the people meeting civil society organizations and other stakeholders and receiving their views, and then consolidating that into a report which will then now form the basis for the final amendment or none of the finance bill, which will pass, and then a president who will then assent to this, and an executive that will implement this. Are we saying that all these guys are completely amok, that the citizens have no say or sway?
I would want to point this conversation to Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity. Mm-hmm. So now, for example, all those that were rejected on the ballot have ended up in public offices and are holding high-end offices in this country today. When you go to Parliament, for example, we say that we are being represented by members of Parliament, but clearly it's not our interest that is being represented. A good example, let's just look at the Finance Bill 2023, and I've alluded to this earlier. When the President said, I would want to see that one who will vote against this finance bill, then everybody ends up voting. If at all they were on people's side, they would defy that, because at the end of the day, I am representing the Kenyans. But all of them, because politics took the day, and perhaps the fact that they are allied to different political parties, and what we ended up seeing is that interest within a political party is what took the day, but not representation of the ordinary Kenyan.
Okay.
So for me, leadership and integrity is really, really, really important.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, right now, largely we are having leaders of questionable integrity.
That's
again,
defeatist.
what can we expect?
Sometimes, I'm sorry, Nerima, but I think sometimes you get defeatist, right? You're the owner of the house. You can buy, doom repellent. You can apply the one that people jipaka. You can take a swat and swat the mosquito. You can do all those things, even using your hands. You can swat this mosquito. But you sit back and you say, you see now, because the windows were open yesterday, the mosquitoes entered the house. You see now the mosquitoes are in the house. Come on. Really?
Are we saying that the citizens of this country cannot say, look, we're not putting up with this. It doesn't matter who is influencing it. This thing's not working for us. Sorry.
So we have...
Take this plan and implement it on another planet. It's not actually working for us in this country and on this planet.
Look at these scenarios. And I think for me, even in as much as we are having this conversation, it's also rallying call to the citizens because we need to invoke Article 1 of the Constitution. Sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. And it's been exercised in different ways. For example, where there are citizens who've gone to the streets. Like last year, we saw people being arrested. There were those who even spent like 3 days and they were not being bailed out. I mean, they were refused bail. What does that mean? And we were being told whenever we went to bail people out, like orders from above, we are not gonna allow these people to go out. So again, look at that violation of the Constitution.
So citizens to
Invoke.
take their
Invoke
absolutely. Article 1 of the Constitution, take their rightful place in this house.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Annet. Annet Nerima is a human rights defender. She is a program manager at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Keep it here for more conversation.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.